Welcome, I'm Darren, and I'll be your guide today as I look at the 1974, 75, and 76 Topps basketball sets. Or if you want to be really picky, the 74, 75, 75, 76, and the 76, 77 basketball sets. And before I launch into it, something that I forgot to mention in the previous two videos is that normally when we want to know what year a card was released, we look at the disclaimer on the back at the copyright date. And the copyright date is normally accurate to the year that the card set is released. There are some cases where an additional card set may be released after, like Topps or Stadium Club Series 3 might be so late that it appears in the next year. On rare occasions, you may see something crazy like that. But for basketball cards in the 1970s, you got a problem because the copyrights were established in 1969 for the NBA and in 1970 for the ABA. And that didn't change. So every single card in the 1970s says either 1969 for any NBA player or 1970 for any ABA player. That's just the way that it is across all of the sets. And it's really frustrating. Now, to be fair, the reason that we see the copyright dates on modern cards is because card companies keep updating copyrights in order to make sure that everything that shows up on the card is locked in place legally. It's why they do it year after year after year. Whereas for the contracts for the players associations, it's not necessarily going to work the same way. So for any basketball card in the 1970s, the way you can tell the year is either by memorizing the designs or by looking at the year referenced on the card and just knowing that that means that it is the year following. So any 1973-74 statistic refers to a 74-75 card design. That's how it works. It is annoying, and you will find people selling cards that are dated as a 1969 Topps or 1970 Topps that clearly are not, because they looked at the date on the back down at the bottom and just assumed that that was the right date. So do keep that in mind. It's complex, it's crazy, it's the way that it worked. But we're here to talk about these three sets. And so this is the middle era or the middle section of the 1970s for these basketball card designs. And they were really in a groove. Topps had really figured out how to make these cards, especially in terms of the way that the set was built. NBA and ABA. You have the NBA players, then you have the ABA players. You have a whole bunch of categories, which includes league leaders and finals cards, and all of those things fit into these sets, and it was just churned out year after year after year. It's great that they had all that in place because the card sets really did work well. And the card design for 1974-75, this is a card that could just as easily be a baseball card design or a football card design. The years leading up tended to be a little bit more distinct and kind of wild compared to the other sports, but in this case, these cards truly do fit in. You have a pennant down at the bottom that fades or that comes out of a basketball. This just kind of moves into an inner border. You have the text on one side, all very bold, and overall, not a bad design. For a 70s card, this is about what you would expect. But the back, man, this back really does look like a baseball card back. Now, one of the things they had started doing pretty recently, and they were in the consistent pattern of doing, which is any player who was an all-star, that was flagged on the regular card. So instead of having two cards of Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, there's just one. There's only this one. And the banner up at the top is, you'll notice that it's a pink banner. And then the whole inner border and the pennant down at the bottom is all blue. Well, this is actually not related to the team colors. This is related to the All-Star team. And when you go over to looking at the ABA cards, well, the ABA cards is the same thing, obviously, as you would expect, but now they have the colors in reverse. So they have a pink inner border and a pink pennant down at the bottom, and then the big box or banner up at the top is blue, so they have them reversed. And this tradition is something that Topps really like to do, and they were continuing with this here in 1974-75. And you can see this with the team cards, the team leader cards. These are vertical in orientation. They have 4 pictures, 4 mugshots of the players who are the statistical leaders for each of the categories. In the middle, they have a pennant which has a team logo on one side, and then they have a league color box where they say this team's team leaders. So for the ABA cards, they all have a pink box, and then for the NBA teams, they all have a blue box. And then league leaders works the exact same way. Now, league leaders, they like to do a horizontal orientation for the cards. They like to have 3 shots of the 3 leaders of each statistical category. Here you can see that there's a very strong theme around the whole card for the league colors. So blue, once again, is the NBA color. And then for all the ABA players, they have a pink card, so it's consistent throughout, so you can always tell which league it is. And then you have the finals. Now, it is interesting when they get to the playoffs because they refer to the finals not as the championship game. That's actually the championship. They refer to the finals as the playoffs, or excuse me, they refer to the playoffs as the finals. So the semifinals is what they refer to for the divisional matchups. So here you get to see the different divisional matchups for each of the pairings, and then the blue and the pink, as you would expect, across all these playoff cards as well. And then they have the finals, and their finals are actually the conference championships for each of the leagues. So you get to see you get to see the 4 games that decide the 2 teams that are going to play for the championship. Then you have the championship cards. Now, the championship cards are vertical in orientation because they don't need to be horizontal. And these cards have a really good, almost a landscape shot down at the bottom with a surprising amount of space for showing the action for the games that these cards pertain to. The big banner up at the top is the team color, or excuse me, not the team color, but the league color. And then they have the opposite color for the border around the image down below. So it's done in a very similar way to what we saw with the All-Star cards. And then that was the set. But there was one exception to this, which is the fact that they had an insert set. Not an insert set, they had insert cards. And these cards were a scratch-off game. So on the front, it's a very bright orange surface. They have a whole bunch of little boxes that you scratch off, and then as you scratch them off, that shows the results of the game. The card back is a big field of rules. This is something I'm very intrigued to sit down and really explore and learn about this game and see how the game is played. But it's almost the last insert that we would receive from Topps in basketball until 1992. So it's not much of an insert, but at least we got something else in these packs. So then so that model for cards was working pretty well in terms of they knew how to make the cards, but it doesn't mean that they were necessarily accessing their audiences. That was a problem that Topps had. In fact, by 1982, they would give up because they could never quite get it to work. So starting in 1975, they began to rethink the model and figure out a way to get people excited about these cards. And the first way was with a complete design overhaul. Just the whole concept of the card was completely redone. So for 1975-76 Topps in basketball, they almost got rid of the border. Just a thin band around the outside. This is all image. All image. So much real estate to take advantage of the natural opportunity of action shots in basketball. Basketball is very unique in that regard. The way that this sport works, it is just very photogenic in terms of the action that's going on. And so Topps was trying to capitalize on that by creating a card that doesn't even fit in the 70s. Maybe an early 80s card, but really this is more of an early 60s, late 50s card. That's it. It's a retro card. In fact, when I look at this card, I think about the 1988 Topps baseball cards, which were done as retro cards. That was the whole concept of the 88 cards was to capture the spirit of old retro cards. That's what this was in 1975. But not in order to bring back the memory of old cards in basketball, because nobody knew they existed. Instead, this was done in a way to maximize the opportunity that basketball brings to audiences of amazing photos. They wanted to lean in on that. Get rid of the border. Okay, so you got a couple of colors in a sash up at the corner for a team color. Then you have the team name that is floating up at the top, the player name floating at the bottom, and that's it. Otherwise, get back and let that image ride. Really impressive. Even the card back is kind of retro. This card back looks more like a late 50s, well, I guess more of a 60s card back. But again, it's capturing a spirit that is definitely not the 1970s, which is a bold move, but they want to get those images working well. And they continue to do the all-star cards where the players who are all-stars, it's just referenced on the card. So anybody who is an all-star, this is their only card. It comes with the banner down at the bottom, and once again they have the team focus or the team association on it. So if they're an ABA player, they have a pink banner. If they're an NBA player, they have a blue banner. But also something interesting is that the color sash up at the top for the team colors, well, it's not. It's actually a sash that has a bunch of stars in it, almost like they're on the all-star team. So do keep in mind that even though these look like standalone all-star cards, they're not. They're the regular player cards for each of these players. So that was the main set. Now, once again, they had all that you would expect. In fact, they added to them. So they once again have the league leaders, and the league leaders are again horizontal. But in this case, they take the player who is the individual league leader, and they give a raised or an enlarged picture of that player. Again, they're really trying to get bigger images to really get people excited about all these players. And so here, for these cards, they have an unusual opportunity to showcase the best player in each statistical category on their appropriate card. And once again, as you would expect, they have the blue cards for the NBA, and they have the pink cards for the ABA. And this is a time when I've got to make a distinct note about that, because when we move from here to the team leaders cards, well, now it actually kind of gets thrown off, because the team leader cards, 4 pictures of players, the league leader or the team leader for each of the 4 statistical categories. Great, yep, nothing wrong with that. But you might notice that the colors are now reversed. So blue is now what you use for the ABA cards. All of the NBA teams, they now have a red box up at the top. So this is one that kind of throws you off if you're putting together a team and all of a sudden this one card shows up looking different. Sorry, that's just kind of the way that they did it. Fortunately, when we move on to the playoffs, okay, now things are getting back to normal. So in this case, for the championship for the conferences, this card has, again, they're trying to get larger images in the cards to really capture the spirit of the game. Doing a pretty good job here. And once again, they also have the color association of the blue for the NBA and the pink for the ABA, but they're toning it down. The cards are now starting to stand more on their own and less with the distinction of the 2 leagues that were, well, just about to merge. So there wasn't really as much of a need to be making these distinctions. And so they were doing a good job of kind of setting them up for saying, look, it's just basketball. And the finals cards, which is now they're actually calling the championship finals, these vertical cards absolutely show that, because it's all image. Like I said, most of the card is taken up. Down at the bottom, they still have the league colors on them, but up at the top, they have a whole different color. So now the color theme, the whole scheme of how these cards are built, is no longer about trying to show 2 leagues. It's more showing the sport of basketball. A nice little addition. And then they also have, the last thing that they did was they added team cards. Now these are team checklist cards. And in this case, what they have is they have a team portrait of every single team. And on the card back, they have a checklist for all the players on that team. Now these cards once again have the blue for the NBA and they have the pink for the ABA, so that association continues with it. But these cards are really special because, man, some of these images are so interesting. Sometimes it's just the way that the way that they arrange the players for the photograph. In some cases, like with the Supersonics, well, I mean, this is just cool. This is fun. And I would love to say that the Supersonics, which is the catchiest of all of these, is the most distinct, but I can't do that because you've also got the LA Lakers where they have just a bunch of headshots. This is the most distinct of all of these team cards or team checklist cards. And I think that the reason that they did the headshots was so they could get Kareem Abdul-Jabbar on here because he wasn't a part of the Lakers during the season, but now he was a part of the Lakers. I'm pretty sure that's what they were going with, but at any rate, it is a standout card. But that's what makes these cards so much fun, is the fact that they all have a different look to them, and some of them get kind of interesting. But I also have to note about the checklist that while that's all that there is to talk about the set, Topps did release strips of checklists, team checklists, and they were done with no photo on the front. It was just a strip of card backs lined up. And that was probably done to try to get people to be more interested in basketball cards apart from the whole card, the whole card market. I really don't know, because they were definitely grasping to try to capture an audience that was not quite where they wanted it to be. And whatever the reason for doing that was, they did create strips of team checklists where the card backs are all showing up on it, but there are no card fronts. It's just all white. Very weird, but all were intentionally, professionally crafted. So that's 1975-76. 76-77, we saw a major change where we no longer had to worry about the NBA and the ABA. Now it was just basketball, it was just the NBA. But of major note about this card is, well, there are a number of things about this set, but the biggest thing is the fact that the card is a totally different dimension. Now, when Topps started doing their 70s run of cards, when they started in 1969, they used their tall boys. And the tall boys was perfect because it's the size of a normal card, it's just taller, which you could put it in with the rest of your cards and it fits with basketball players who are just taller than everybody else. But in 1976, they decided to make a whole different design where they had a much wider card and a somewhat taller than a tall boy card. These things are huge and they don't fit in anything. I mean, there are no card pages that were ever made for these. You have to put them into 4 card sheets, and they're very loose. They're not tight at all. It's a very awkward set to make, or a very awkward set to work with. But it's all about the real estate for the images, which makes it really funny when you consider just how many of these cards used portraits of the players. But there are a lot of action shots. Not that it really matters, because these cards, the printing quality is the same cheap crap that Topps always created. It's just that now the picture is much bigger, but still just as cheap. So weird dynamic, but we do get some really impressive images, whether you could really read them effectively or not. It doesn't matter. They're very exciting. But the thing that's really impressive about this set is how much it changed from the previous year, because the set is smaller. There are no subsets. I mean, there are no league leaders. There's no playoffs, none of that stuff. And the All-Star cards are now, once again, second cards of players. So any player who was an All-Star, they had a regular player card. They also had a second card that was an All-Star card. So 2 cards for each one of these players. And of note is the fact that, well, that was the only subset they had. I mean, that was it. That's all there is to say about the 1976-77 set. They were making radical changes to try to capture an audience that wasn't quite ready to really be there. In fact, so much so that after 1982, when Topps would leave, it would take Fleer a number of years before they would finally embrace the card market for basketball. And even at that, there wasn't much of a market, and Fleer struggled early on with their card sets a decade after the set. So this set does a really good job of showing you just how much Topps had to work to try to get an audience for these cards, because it just wasn't natural. But at any rate, those are the three sets that are the middle years of the 1970s for Topps basketball. And it is a very interesting period to be changing. You saw the last two sets of the standard set for Topps basketball, and then you saw that one-of-a-kind set that was way bigger than everything else before they got back to standard cards. They were struggling, but we got some interesting things as a result. So that's what I've got to say for that. So if you haven't seen the previous two videos that I've done about early Topps cards, definitely check those out, because it's fun to watch how Topps was working to, well, Topps, Fleer, and Topps were working to try to figure out how to make cards for basketball fans. It is an interesting journey, and this is a portion of that journey. So definitely check those out. I think I may have asked you to subscribe. Don't know, but it doesn't matter. And past that, yeah, thank you very much for watching.